Okay, that work. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ogniwo Cooperative. My name is Anna Gulinska. I'm head of the board, and our place here in Podgórze is a cooperative and a cafe and independent bookstore and a place of meetings and debates and discussions and exchanging views and ideas and any other socially engaged activity that you can come up with probably is happening here. We are also like informal hub for many independent initiatives. We work closely with many NGOs, with formal and informal collectives. All of that initiatives and people that wanted to be active in the city, in the country, that want to bring some change to the society. So also our bookstore and the books we have here correspond with that idea, with the ideas of equality, solidarity, human rights, etc. So I hope that you will have a very good discussion. Really, we are so happy to have you here, and just wanted to say that we are very democratic institution as a cooperative with very flat structure and democratic management. So welcome and have a nice evening.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just real briefly, my name is Adam Reichardt. I'm editor-in-chief of New Eastern Europe, based here in Kraków, Poland. We're very excited to be able to co-host this event, which is part of a bigger project where we brought editors and journalists from different European countries here today. We had a whole day of discussions in the framework of the Eurozine network, which is a network of European cultural journals, which New Eastern Europe is also a member of. And I'm very pleased that we managed to gather here today. We had some really intense discussions, but we have one more yet intense discussion, which is going to take place in the next minutes. So I will not take much time. I just want to thank our co-organizers and co-sponsors, the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Warsaw's office. Very grateful for your support. And also grateful for some support from the European Commission as well for allowing us to organize this event. So thank you very much, and I would like to ask just Agata from the Heinrich Böll Warsaw Foundation Warsaw office to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Adam. Just like you, I will make it very brief. I actually had a speech prepared, but since we're so, cozy and clandestine, and I'm also very excited about tonight's debate, I'm going to keep it brief. Thank you. Thank you to New Eastern Europe and all of you from Eurozine for making this possible, for welcoming me very warmly into your circle, which is, a great experience to me, who is only like starting out in the field. Anyway, something that I think for us as the Heinrich Böll Foundation is of great value is democracy. And there is really just one sentence from my speech that I wanted to highlight to you. And this is also the thought that I think brought us into this project, is that the media serves as the lifeblood of a functioning democracy. And ensuring that citizens are well informed is the only guarantee for them to make well-educated decisions and to make knowledgeable decisions and to decide consciously about their future and the future of their countries. And I'm very grateful to you that you all in your respective fields are part of that. So great thanks to you, and I'm wishing all of us a very fruitful and very exciting debate and meaningful networking.
So with that introduction, I would like to invite our panelists and our moderator up for the discussion, in which we will start right now. So you have 3 microphones. The black one, so you have to share a little bit. The black ones are on off, so you can switch, and this one's always on.
Yes. So thank you very much. And I'm very pleased today to be chairing this very interesting and important debate on the impact of illiberalism on European debates. And I already want to thank my panelists for their participation and their insights on the topic. So illiberalism is not a new topic, but somehow has been raising in Europe and sort of spreading to many European countries. It sort of started first with Hungary, which we will talk about today, and sort of also spread to other European countries, notably Poland, in which the debate is happening. So illiberalism is sort of a backlash against liberalism and liberal democracy that is seen as a failed system. And illiberalism is still characterized by democratically elected regimes, but somehow we ignored constitutional limits of their power and also deprived their citizens of rights and liberties. They propose solutions that are mostly nation-centric and sovereignist and favor traditional hierarchies and cultural homogeneity. And obviously, in relation to the EU, it's illiberalism sort of reject the EU's founding values, notably democratic values and the rule of law, which created the rule of law crisis in the EU, with the decline of rule of law and a stranglehold on the media and on constitutional courts in different European countries. So today we're talking about illiberalism and how it created challenges for policymakers and civil society organization and journalists to talk about complex debates around different topics. We can think about migration or multiculturalism or human rights more generally. And also in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this war sort of highlighted how external actors can exacerbate this illiberal trend and also manipulate public opinion into more anti-democratic sentiments. So I think it's very important that we have this discussion tonight. So I am joined by editors and journalists and cultural activists to discuss how European debates is affected by this illiberal trends in Europe and generally what it means for democracy in Europe. So I'll introduce them. First would be Bartosz Panek. He's a radio journalist, reporter, and political scientist. He has spent half of his life in front of the microphone and the longest with the Polish radio. Then we have Reka Pak, who is the editor-in-chief of Eurozone. She's a Hungarian journalist, author, broadcaster who specializes in environmental, social, and human rights issues. She has anchored the Hungarian-speaking social science infotainment radio program, Professor Paprika, and
don't worry about it.
The indie political YouTube show Fellas. We then have Luka Gabrielčič, who is a Slovenian historian, political analyst, and translator. He's an editor at the Slovenian journal Rasputia. Sorry. And again, Stanko, right? Who is the executive director of the Eurocentric Association, who deals with promotion of rule of law and democracy in Europe. He is also an associate professor at the Faculty of History at the University of Bucharest and the editor of Laport. So thank you very much for being here. We'll proceed on the way that you first have introductory statement wrote on the issue. Then I'll come up with some question, I think a bit more specific, also on what you said and the country you're focusing on. And then we'll open the floor to the audience. Yes. Oh, sorry. My name is Elodie. Yeah, that's fine. I forgot. And yeah, so my name is Elodie. I'm a PhD student at Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and generally very interested on democratic backsliding or illiberal trends in Europe. So let's proceed. Poland first.
Yeah, as the host of
Yeah, sure.
the conference, thank you so much for having me here. I was a bit puzzled when Ivona Reichardt from the editorial board of the New Eastern Europe called me, and she said she would invite me to take part in these conversations, in the whole conference, in the meeting. I would like to tell you why I felt a bit puzzled, because I define myself as a simple journo, more than a political scientist, although my background political science and international relations. I'm a graduate of the Warsaw University.
More qualified than I am.
Perhaps. But I thought that I know why I was feeling in such a way, because after leaving the Polish radio, for which I worked for more than 20 years, and being a freelancer, I don't feel so strong to make public statements about the situation in Poland and in Europe. But then I remember the moment in which I digged in my mind and read once again quite famous in Polish cultural life quotation from Stefan Kisielewski, a famous Polish composer and writer, who in the communist era used to say that, I'll put it very diplomatically, very, very polite, that he used to say that if we find ourselves in the place where the sun doesn't shine, it is not yet a problem. The situation gets serious when we start to settle in here. Stefan Kisielewski died in 1991, and a couple of years ago, I talked to his son, Jerzy Kisielewski, who is also a journalist, and asked him what Mr. Kisielewski would have told now to me and to other people from my generation. And Jerzy answered, my dad would have repeated the sentence about the place where the sun doesn't shine, exactly in the same way that he used to say it and repeat it during the 70s and the 80s. And I think that the problem with Polish illiberalism now, since the year of 2015, is that after 1989, we didn't experience any serious social policy from different governments that were in power in Poland, despite 2 short periods in the mid-1990s and the first decade of the 21st century, when the post-communist leftist party was in power. We were always told that the hard and harsh situation is due to the communist period, due to the collapse of the socialist centralized economy, and we just have to face these consequences. And well, I remember that when I was a teenager, Polish press, television, and also the Polish radio talked a lot about regions in northern Poland and Western Poland, where the unemployment rate exceeded 30%, while the average unemployment rate was about 15%. And these regions were dominated mostly by the state-owned farms during the communist era, during the communist period or communist rule. And after 1991, they collapsed. I mean, those state-owned farms. And, well, unemployment rate went really, really high. So people were left out, and they had to, well, find solutions on their own. And one of the ways was just to emigrate from Poland to Germany, to Italy, to the UK, or any other country that could offer a stable job for people who were not educated at all. They used to carry out manual job, mainly for the long years of working for the state-owned farms, for instance. And I think that the lack of such a coherent social policy helped a lot Law and Justice Party to win the elections in 2015. And what I assume is that in the Polish political life, illiberalism proved to be strong or stronger than liberalism, not only because of the social phase. It succeeded, in my opinion, in imposing on the whole society the logics of divisions. And, well, probably you know that the basic tool of the victory of the Law and Justice were direct money transfers to all people despite their income. But people felt that they are, well, they are the citizens of the country. That was the official narration, that no one should be left out, no one should be ignored, no one should be treated as a citizen of the second or the third category. And what's more, the fact that this social phase, it's, after all, it's not a real social policy. It's it pretends to be a social policy because, well, direct money transfers don't guarantee that the public policies work at all. We still lack serious transportation policy or pension reform or health system policy. So this is not the case, but to guarantee the being in power, the ruling party decided to divide people, to use the propaganda tools and to use the conservative or far conservative agenda to say that what we go for is the normality, and the liberal phase of our society is something strange, is weird, is not connected, is not coherent with our tradition, with our nation. And this is why, in my opinion, they put into the mainstream of our political debate themes, topics that could be seen as controversial. I mean, abortion, LGBTQA, community rights, same-sex marriages, not to mention about judiciary system reforms or public media smashing. So there are two factors that made the Polish illiberalism so strong. So the so-called social policy and the old Roman rule, divide and rule. And well, it's very sad, I think, because they ultimately didn't invent anything new at all. It's always the same old Roman rule, but only retold and adjusted to the circumstances of the second decade of the 21st century. Yeah, that was the point.
Thank you very much. This is a very good start, and I think I have a lot of more questions on the logic of division, but obviously now we go to our next speaker who will talk about Hungary.
I'm gonna drag this from underneath you guys. Maybe it's not such a good idea, but thank you.
Take this one.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So first of all, thanks for the invitation and hosting of today's and yesterday's meeting to, first and foremost, to New Eastern Europe and the Heinrich Böll Stiftung and the Ognivo Collective. I hope I didn't butcher your name or only liminally. I couldn't help but acknowledge that I was the only one who appeared with a bit of alcohol on the side, but Hungary is the global leader right now in alcoholism, way before Russia and Belarus. So maybe I do represent 2 million of my fellow country people. And then I can blame this for whatever I say. If I last too long, you can smother me with one of those pillows. I just want to say a couple more words about what Eurzine is, because this is this interesting hybrid mule of an organization. We are 25 years, the online magazine this year, and we are turning 40 as a professional network. These meetings informally between a journal editors started in 1983, then basically illegally or semi-legally editors meeting across the Iron Curtain. I mean, from both sides, not on the Iron Curtain, technically speaking. They didn't climb it. So this is quite a big anniversary for us. Eurzine is a network of a bit more than 100 partner publications, primarily publications and some institutions. And the reason I'm bringing this up beyond what Adam has already said about it is because in case you don't read Slovenian or Romanian, shame on you, of course, and me too. But if you are interested in the articles and in the work of my esteemed and lovely colleagues and many more from the network, then you can find articles translated and published from them and reviews of their issues on eurzine.com. I hope you check it out and find it interesting. We're also working on a platform that will be a more technological solution to bring you content from across many languages. We'll say more on that this autumn. Hopefully you will be able to read Turkish without any Duolingo. So we'll get back to that soon. As for illiberalism, I will take this up where you left. This is literally nothing new, both in the shorter run, because I don't know who remembers Berlusconi, but I still do. We can, of course, blame the Hungarians because Nicolas Sarkozy at least has some roots there. So, I think it is important to frame this political turn against democracy in a slightly wider context and not just in a long historical context. This is a direct continuation of neoconservatism. This is a different brand. I don't even see necessarily what the reason for the brand change was. Maybe because Coca-Cola changes its logo sometimes. It's necessary for conservatives too. I am not that professional in this field, but this is this political movement, however we're going to call it, and it does have its appearances not just in the whatever we're going to call, whether it's Central or Eastern Europe, the expression you prefer. I prefer Eastern, but we can go with Central Europe if you feel more comfortable with that. It shows up all around Europe, but just to be very frank on the technical side, the brand of illiberalism that was introduced in Hungary in parallel with Israel is a direct import through the import of political advisors and political strategies workshopped and mirror translated and imported without severe adaptation from US Republicans. I'm not saying everything is invented in the US, because of course there's also like a great pooling of knowledge. It's a melting pot, right? But what I'm saying is that this is a genuinely internationalist movement. It is not based on values. It is based on opportunities, nothing else. It doesn't have anything to do with value systems or beliefs. And I think it's important to see that, just so that we can approach the problem strategically. Like, if we respond to every prompt, every impulse with a genuine, sincere answer to that seeming rhetorical response, we basically miss the target. It is about provocation. It is primarily about fragmentation, not just radicalization, but the breakdown of big tent politics, which itself was a problematic strategy already, right? So we don't really have big tent politics to return to. That is also the reason why, for instance, progressive social policy went extinct or more or less extinct to different levels, or has been diminishing consistently for decades in the, let's say, first and second world, whatever that means, just for the ease of the expression. But you can criticize me for this, for all you want. So I think if we can see this genuinely internationalist, like really export-based nature of illiberalism, then it is quite easy to recognize that the response to it will have to be local, but cannot be restricted to localities, right? Because if the peace can campaign with turning Warsaw into Budapest, which is quite an interesting proposition in and of itself. I mean, Budapest can be lovely, but we have a slightly better weather. Okay, I'll agree to that. But oh yeah, yeah. I guess we can still like take account of those football stadiums. I don't know what we're going to use them for, but they might be nice for like roasting marshmallows or something. Well, the pieces of Warsaw, yeah, definitely. So the response also has to be based on alliances. I think this is not an analysis, this is an opinion at this point. And this has to tackle what is at the core of this divide and conquer strategy, which is as Roman as it is in its applications, at least as much Habsburg. You know, we can sort of come up with these closer examples to where it worked amazingly in the region, and it has its own historical embeddedness, less so in Poland, very much in Hungary or Serbia, for instance, which is also a flagship, but being a non-EU member is much less discussed in international news, but is basically just an even more severe version of the same concoction. So if they are able to support each other's, so to say, political movements, or I should say, each other's political enterprises, because these are not movements in that sense, then the response or the solution for a more democratic way of life also has to come, or also will require a genuinely both international, but not just international, but truly coalition-based approach, right? And this is something we have brought up today already. To me, just as a private person, it has been stunning to see how Poland, which has been historically much better at coalition building than, for instance, Hungary, which has always been the most fragmented and politically individualistic in the region. I'm not bad-mouthing my country. You know, I come from there for a reason. But it is just a fact that it has shown up in all the research, in all the political strategies, that Hungary has been predisposed to be very vulnerable to fragmenting politics. But Poland historically, and like we're talking short spans, so we're talking Solidarność, for instance, has a much greater historical political experience and track record of coalition building. And somehow this fragmentation worked so much better than I personally would have. Well, I guess I would have hoped, but just expect this was more a hope. But I do really think that both these traditions and both the lessons we take away from these failures have to inform how we try and maybe not restore, but produce a kind of democracy that would stand its ground better against both just wild mirror translated imports and like expected endeavors to break it down. We can't expect democracy to stand in a benevolent environment with nobody attacking it, right? This is not that kind of enterprise. So it has to have a self-defense mechanism, I think, that is culturally rooted and that translates into political strategies.
Thank you very much. Also very interesting and a lot of things to say on the coalition building, I think. So now we'll move to Slovenia. And yeah, just tell us about the situation in the country, because I think we had two, cases where illiberal trends are like already, it's been several
Voted
years,
out,
and we know about this, but I think the Slovenian case may be a bit, mitigated, probably.
I hope to be as short as I can, which it's already a dangerous proposition. But I really hope that we will have more of a debate and less of a sum of monologue. Because I think, like, if we defined liberalism as a political movement that tries to that works in kind of its business model is increasing polarization, as has been said, and shutting down genuine debates, we have to like counter it by having more debates. So I really welcome this panel, and I'm really glad that I can be here. Although, of course, speaking of illiberalism in Poland, it's always a little bit uneasy. I think always that you guys should tell us, because you come from sort of you're in the belly of the beast, so to say. Slovenia, especially during the pandemics, suddenly came to the foreground as another country in this Eastern European axis of illiberal evil. It was already portrayed as being on the path of Hungary, of Poland, with a discourse that already sort of implies some sense of essentialization, which is always dangerous. And then, almost exactly 1 year ago, the far-right, radical right government was voted out with a big margin. So I could go, and maybe if you're interested, I can go into questions why that happened and why I think that the things developed differently. But maybe it's more useful, even especially since Poland is facing election this year as well, to think about what has changed in the past year. So on one hand, a lot. In a way, there has been a restoration of the status quo. But the problem is that precisely that status quo, as you have seen in Poland, right, with the previous government, has created the possibilities for this negative change to happen. So if you try just to go back, aren't you, in some sense, perpetuating the political climate, the social climate that made this democratic evolution possible from the first place? One thing that I think is showing up right now in Slovenia is, and in a very mild way, because the previous government actually was tried to govern as peace without having won the election, so without having the impetus of democratic mandate, and without actually having even a strong majority. And this was doomed to fail. They tried to use the legislation for against fighting against COVID. So the emergency rule by decrees, decrees. This failed during especially I think the short term, because they came to power in midterm and pushed back by the courts, and they were not able to do anything in terms of legislation. So on one hand, it's like the legacy could be rolled back pretty easily. But on the other hand, for example, it showed how much you can do even if you don't change the law. I mean, you can change a lot about political culture, you can pack institutions of the state with your own people, and then create the situation, because I think this is the biggest legacy looking 1 year back. It's like how the current coalition came to power with a very simple message, which was basically the restoration of the previous status, with some promises that usually come with politics, renewal, democratic renewal, etc., etc. So far, they had one promise and they haven't been really successful of doing. We still have right now the debate. I mean, has just recently, let's say, maybe ended, about how to roll back the political appointments on state television, something that you know very well about. So there was clearly a plan, a blueprint, copied from the Polish case and from the Hungarian, to kind of transform the public television into a sort of mouthpiece of the government. This failed. Basically, they managed to actually install their own people once the elections were already almost like happening. So there was this happened too late. But the appointees, their political appointees remained there for almost 1 year. And the question that really kind of was raised, and I think you will have to deal with it in Poland, is like, how do you roll back actually an illiberal system? This is a debate that I know that you had in Hungary before the election, when for a moment it seemed that the opposition might have won.
We wanted it
During well, sure, but there was a moment in which it seems as a credible alternative. So that people started talking, okay, how, like, this has been a severe state capture in Hungary, right? On levels which is even deeper than in the Polish case, for a reason, because Fidesz actually the first time and then the third time won with actually significant majorities, especially because huge majorities against the liberal opposition, which is not the case in Poland. Poland is always like half-half, it's like Turkey in this case. So there is a deep state capture, and if you come to power, right? What do? Do you actually use the rule of law, or do you use like illiberal measures against illiberalism in themselves? They had this discussion, and Janusz Kisz, the famous liberal philosopher, says, no, we cannot do the same for good. But if you don't do that, how do you actually, how do you restore the previous situation? How do you restore the rule of law while in a certain sense having necessary probably having to use some of the methods of the liberals use? And if the opposition wins in Poland, this will be a huge issue, I think. I don't know how much is being debated right now on theoretical and practical blueprint level. So, I can imagine. So what do you do? How do you restore the rule of law? Like by an lex omnibus that kind of says, okay, everything that happened in the past 8 years will be rolled back. This is impossible, right? You have to use external measure. And I think that in Hungary, this would have been even more important. Maybe it's easier because you can say, okay, all these laws were actually passed through in an illegal, non-correct way, so we just roll them back. But in Hungary, the problem is that like the sort of neoconservative revolution happened actually, perfectly legally. In terms like the constitution was changed, everything was changed with like 2/3 majority. Technically legal. That's what I'm trying to say. So, if, for example, the opposition had won in Hungary with a very slim majority, what could have done? I mean, they actually would have needed to use exactly the same tools that peace used in Poland. So going against the established constitution, against the established rule of law, in order to establish democracy, which is impossible, I think, or very, very difficult. And so this question, I think it will become a very significant one, and we see this in a very mild way taking place in Slovenia. Because the current government was in a big dilemma. They basically organized a coalition very briefly before the election. They didn't have a real plan how to do it. And they have been proven in many, many cases incapable of undoing the legacy of the previous government, precisely because of the mixture, not because it was so difficult, but because on one hand, they didn't really want to use the same mechanism of like just sacking people from their jobs, placing new people and then waiting for the courts to decide. And in the meantime, you already have a fait accompli, right? They wanted to do it in the legal way. It took more time. It turned out that, of course, like in a rule of law system, everybody has legal protections, including those who were named by the previous government. So this is like an issue which I think it's very, it will turn out to be very complex. And I'm very glad that you mentioned Berlusconi in your the debate, the tribute to him in your presentation. I grew up in the 90s. In Slovenia, in a town like on bordering with Italy. Back then, we were still all watching Italian television, so we were following very closely what was happening in Italy. And I always say that, like, I sort of felt that I was like had a vaccine in the 90s against liberalism, or I found it, at least for myself, much easier to recognize certain trends, because like looking from Slovenia as like sort of liberal limbo, a success story of the transition in the 90s. With one eye, I could look at what was happening in Italy with Berlusconi, with the collapse of the established political system, the creation of a new type of politics. And on the other hand, what was happening in the other former republics of Yugoslavia, with like the instrumental use of ethnic hatred and ethnic division, and especially, I would say, the resentment of the formerly dominating ethnic group against the demands of the minorities. And with this sort of knowledge from safe distance, I feel that I could understand better Trumpism and better what was happening in the past decade in the West. It seems that I have seen this before. And going back to the issue of Italy and Berlusconi, now that he has died, exactly to go back to my previous point, there has been a lot of reflection on how he has changed Italian politics. And every time he came to power, and then he was voted out, and he never actually won two consecutive elections. He was like always voted out. Nevertheless, he changed deeply the way the Italian politics was being conducted. In a way, the status quo was not restored, and it was a big mistake to think that it could happen. And this was a big mistake of the opposition back then, not to really think thoroughly, okay, how do we move forward from this? How do we kind of adapt our politics, not just to fight this political force, because they did this quite successfully, they defeated him 2 times. But how do we kind of create a new set of policies that kind of moves us into a more some sort of sustainable political system where it's actually possible to debate policies and so on and so forth. And this is, I think, the big challenge for the opposition forces in Poland. I mean, maybe Hungary has more it's more difficult to see a change right now. But however, to enter a more positive note, but for example, Timothy Snyder always stresses out, and I think this is very important, and Jan Werner Müller as well, the weakness of these illiberal projects is that they're really kind of based for short and midterm. They are personalistic, they are unable to reproduce themselves, and they are bound to fall apart. But the destruction they leave behind them, it's really big. And so to think how to clean this mess up to him very, very hard how to clean this mess up, I think it's the big challenge of now.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Adam, for inviting me here. It's very important that we have this discussion on illiberalism, and I'm happy to bring the Romanian case. I would say that after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, illiberalism vigor to shape the public debate has diminished. But the phenomenon is still strong. The actors are the same, and their actions are going on. As for the Romanian illiberalism, unlike the Hungarian and the Polish ones, which are the epitomes of illiberalism in Europe, Romanian illiberalism has nothing ideological and philosophical. Romanian illiberalism has to do mostly with money and corruption. And because you mentioned before Berlusconi, I think that I'll tell you a joke with Berlusconi and the former Romanian Prime Minister, Adrian Năstase, who was a presidential candidate in 2000, and later he spent some time in jail for corruption, of course. The story goes that Berlusconi invites Năstase during one visit to spend some time in one of his wonderful villas. Impressed by the architecture, the Romanian Prime Minister asked, "Oh, Mr. Berlusconi, wonderful villa, how did you manage to do this?" And Berlusconi invites Năstase on the balcony and show him in the distance a highway. "Do you see that wonderful three-way highway?" And Năstase said yes. And Berlusconi replies, "Okay, it was supposed to have 4 ways. And that's how I made, the villa." And, and after a while, Berlusconi comes to Romania and, is invited to Năstase, mountain house. And again, Berlusconi very impressed by the house. How come, a Romanian, prime minister, hired by the state to have such a villa? And he asks, "Mr. Năstase, you should also tell me how you managed to do this villa." And, Năstase invites Berlusconi in the balcony and tells Berlusconi that, "Mr. Berlusconi, do you see that 4 ways highway in the distance?" Berlusconi looks and said, "No." Exactly. So, as for Romanian illiberalism, the year is 2017. You may remember huge demonstration in the streets in Bucharest. I mean, it was the year where strong actions were taken against the judiciary and the rule of law. There were huge protests in Bucharest and all over the country that forced the government to resign. But the offensive on the rule of law did not stop. And let's say the hope was, that the problem would be solved during the election. And the European election from 2019 gave some hope. But during the general elections that were in 2020, there were problems. And I would like to speak a bit about the 2 crises that complicated everything, and probably to steer a comparative discussion about these 2 crises and their implication from the fate of illiberalism. The first is the COVID crisis. I mean, the 2020 election happened in the middle of the COVID crisis. It was the lowest turnout in the election, 31% presence, which is, the lowest since the fall of the communist regime. And those elections brought something unexpected in the Romanian politics. It was the emergence and the electoral success of a far-right party that took 10% of the votes. It was the Alliance for the Union of All Romanians. The acronym is AUR, which in Romanian language means gold. So, what is interesting is that this new party took advantage and won, its place by taking advantage of the COVID crisis in an unexpected way. Instead of using COVID to justify its need to take power, the party denied the very existence of the pandemic. And the leaders of the party were very strong anti-vax supporters, and they distributed, the rhetoric that was propagated by Russia. After the COVID crisis, it was no surprise that the Romanian anti-vax online movement mutated into a pro-Russian online ghetto. And we have this online ghetto, pro-Russian online ghetto, who is getting stronger, and no one really knows how big it is, because these people do not communicate in the mainstream media. They are communicating only in their, let's say, restrained ghetto. The second crisis was brought by the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and it impacted the public presence of illiberalism a lot. And my idea is that the Russian invasion in Ukraine made the autocratic and illiberal political leaders from the region look like good guys. It's not the case with Orban, but the Polish political leaders went under the radar. And for a moment, in the case of the Romanian leaders, the unwavering support for Ukraine made possible the continuation of some illiberal measures without being noticed or debate in the public space. And I have example. I won't spend time to tell about this, but they are directed on the judiciary, the suppression of the press, so on and so forth. So, in a way, Romanian illiberalism is a work in progress. And I think we should ask not only how it looks now and how it impacts the public debate, but also how it would look tomorrow. And the good news and the bad news at the same time is that tomorrow is approaching. In the Polish case, tomorrow is this year. You have general elections, and everyone is looking forward to see the results. In Romania, we'll have 4 big rounds of elections next year. And the first will be the European election, and this will be the tournesol test for what will be the future. And the projections indicate that our party is going to take a big score in those elections. And after that, we'll have local election, parliamentary election, and presidential elections. So the story goes on. We have to see from the election what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for the diverse perspective. We'll ask you on the next round to be very brief so that we can have more time for the question from the audience. So first, if you go back to Bartosz on Poland, and I want to go back to your logic of division, which I think is, very true in practice, but sort of how did the Polish government manage this? And especially, I would like to bring in the media control. If you could say more, a bit more about this and what implication it has on citizens.
Yeah, this is quite simple. I'll be very brief on this, but a bit later, I would like to come back for a while to the catchphrase that Jarosław Kaczyński used in 2015 during the electoral campaign and just after winning the elections, that there will be another Budapest in Warsaw. It is not working anymore after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine because of the close ties between Orban's regime and Putin's
At least one
regime.
thing.
Yeah, at
Yeah.
least one thing. So they do not recall it anymore. So no Budapest, rather Seoul now. So the South Korea is our greatest partner in well, new military devices, for instance, and
Citizen surveillance, maybe?
yeah, why not? Yeah,
They're very good
yeah,
at that.
yeah, because Pegasus from Israel is, well, not more accessible. So we will probably experience and see attempts at building those chaebols, those great enterprises, super enterprises that Southern Korean regimes in the 60s and 70s invented as tools of, let's say, a limited capitalist progress. Going back to the question of how the public media system was smashed or reformed in the official narration in Poland, well, the first thing I would like to touch upon is that the Polish constitution is quite clear about how the control on the public radio and public television should look like. There is a constitutional body called the State Council for Radio and Television. But the Law and Justice Party decided to create one more body, which would be strictly political one, and it was introduced by a simple law, and it is called Rada Mediów Narodowych, so Council for National Media. And well, it takes care, not is responsible. I use this phrase on purpose. It takes care of appointing selected people for well, as the editors in chief and the presidents of different radio stations and the public television. So public media really became kind of PR agencies for the government and the ruling party. So the logics of divisions are very simple. So nothing really new. I would say one more time. All the stuff, all the pieces, all the coverage that is connected to the governmental activities is only one-sided, and of course the coverage which regarding the opposition is contrary, is one-sided, but let's say it's black, not white. So on one hand, public media tend to whiten the government, and of course they present all the success stories of the investments and so on and so far, and how patriotic they are, and they use let's say kind of black PR in terms of covering and talking about opposition, different activities. And the quite fun but also sad fact was that the Great March that the biggest opposition party, the Civic Platform, organized on the 4th of June in Warsaw, and it gathered approximately 500,000 people. Public media didn't say a word about this event, so they concentrated on, I don't know what, a kind of secondary information, secondary events. It was Sunday, so people go to church, people spend time out, and so on and so far. So no, no event, no public gathering in Warsaw. No, and if they said a word, if they tried to cover it, they presented that much as a kind of hatred towards the good government and other people who didn't come to Warsaw for that much. So this is the quite simple logics of divisions and creating divisions in public media, which are not more public. They are governmental or privatized by the ruling party.
Thank you very much. On Hungary, I would like to maybe ask you about Russia, because we talked a little bit about, after the invasion of Ukraine, how in some countries it's actually sort of going either not necessarily on the more liberal side, but at least turning back a little bit. And in Hungary, obviously have a strong link with Russia. So how did this impact also on the EU level, for instance?
Oh, Russia, we love it. We buy it in bulk, of course. So this is a very interesting case study to see how seemingly conservative. Again, this is deeply opportunist. I say this again and again until it seeps in. I guess for everyone here, it's kind of obvious. There are no values attached to this illiberalist regime. There are values performed. They are not inherent values that need to be respected. None of them. And we have seen this time and time over again, repeating controversial, contradictory policies within the span of a couple weeks, even when the wind turns, basically. But it is an interesting thing to see that in a genuinely, overwhelmingly, unquestioningly Eurocentric, Occidentalist, deeply West-obsessed country, which doesn't, whose public discourse doesn't acknowledge the existence of its neighbors, unless it's very necessary for like a Visegrad meeting or something like this, but genuinely doesn't consider its neighbors as factors in how they conduct themselves. It has been possible to turn this polity not yet anti-EU, not yet anti-NATO, but less approving of these institutions and deeply pro-Russian with this very immediate anti-Soviet heritage by a regime whose flagship speaker, also back then an opportunist, but that basically made his career with one statement demanding that Ruski koza, so the Russians should go home, has managed to turn to exploit this friendship towards Russia, which is not a friendship, of course, it's an accidental economical alliance, into something that is acceptable for its electorate. In a country where both major revolutions that we commemorate were beaten down by, in some form, the Russians. And let me also just mark that we took a gigantic loan from Putin, not from the IMF, because we're independent from them. We took a gigantic loan from Putin for an additional block for our nuclear power plant, also, of course, Russian design, because what else? Which we are now having major problems with within the EU, and also with Russians who cannot deliver, not just because of the war. And the installments of this loan are due on the 15th of March each year, which is the anniversary of one of these revolutions that they beat down. So I find that very sweetly symbolic of the level of compromise that this government is willing to do. I sincerely don't think that this was like poetic intention on the Russians' part, but the fact that the Hungarian government wasn't even willing to negotiate this date is quite telling. So, and the way it was done is exactly what Bartosz has just explained, but to an even deeper level. So hermetically closed media sphere, which is not just dominated, but really industrially colonized, and then hermetically closed away from all its independent parts. There is nothing seeping through, no exposure, not only not different argument, anything that's alternative, that's different from this generalna linea, the party's central will, is not even mentioned whatsoever. And what is very important is that the physical reach of any independent media has been severely limited by creating fake television stations so that you wouldn't get the independent ones or the non-politically aligned ones in the free channel selection and things like this. Buying up, or well, primarily buying up, but otherwise also pressuring online outlets, etc. So this is, and this leads to my response to Luca. This is a very systematic, very deeply embedded, incredible level of state capture. Joseph Habsburg II would applaud this, like that level of centralization, which doesn't work, by the way. Like this is not effective. This is not an effective use of resources. This is not an effective use of human capacity. This is frustrating for everyone in the system. And this, I think, is important to note. Like these people buy yachts and try to sail them on the Plattensee, which doesn't have enough water for them to float because we have droughts, you know. Nobody is happy in the system. What you can see in the whole political class, on the faces of all this elite, in all their, not just the very rare genuine responses, but every response or every communication, you can see that this is horrible to be in. So hence 20.1% alcoholism in the country, which is actually quite decent for the situation, I think. I raise my glass to it. I'm not happy about this, just to, just to be sure for those watching at home. I'm not happy about this. But this takes me to the response to what Luca has said, how this is going to be overturned. I think overturning or sort of dialing back, I wouldn't even say a restoration after illiberalism, because I wouldn't advise anybody to try and restore. As you also said, you would restore things that led us here. So yeah, let's try and go down another route. I assume that these conversations, as well as much more of the intellectual work and of course the most important part, the community building, which is missing in so many places, are also part of the work, not of a political takeover, but trying to come up with the viable alternatives and preparing it for a situation when it is possible. The sorry and very depressing, seemingly defeatist answer I have in the case of Hungary, that these conversations are not for us. I know this sounds horrible, and just hear me out. I'm not trying to talk down. I do belong there. I deserve it, So I'm not denying my belonging or not trying to say that, us, a few intellectuals, are so much better than the rest of us. No, it's not the case. The case is that Hungary, just in the span of, let's say, 200 years, which is in terms of political culture, not a long time. Hungary has been the second greatest bully of this region. And this bully at some point fell down from the top of the stairs, broke every second bone in its body, and still hasn't acknowledged it. That's been 100 years now, right? More or less. A bit more, actually. Just to come up with a very basic simile. And this sick bully will not be able to get out of the situation right now, because, as you said, there are no sort of legally clean methods to get out of this mess, which was technically executed through laws, not legally, but this legal system has already very early on lost its legitimacy on so many levels, not just because of the elections, etc., but for so many reasons. So I don't agree with János Kiss to extraordinary trouble, extraordinary measures are going to be the response. I'm not talking about, another military government, but, fingers crossed, not that. The only thing that is going to take Hungary out of this place is going to be the same thing that it always uses an advantage, which is the same thing that took us out of, or sort of delivered us from the Soviet regime. It's when the region carries us. I know this sounds horrible, but but also we rely on the mercy of our siblings and cousins and friends and neighbors whom we haven't really treated too well recently to help us by carrying us until a transformation can begin. So for Hungary, an opportunity has to materialize for it to really drag itself out of the mud. But it's not going to happen without the rest of the region. And I'm not even talking out of this a purple haze type of leftist. I did this we need to build coalitions. We need to, but in and of itself, Hungary is not coming out of this whatsoever. One more comment, just on the far right party AUR. I find it quite poetic that they chose this name that marks them as golden, whereas Romania's gold is poisoning Romania as well as the rest of the region. Not because of the Romanian population's fault, by the way.
Thank you so much. When it comes to Slovenia, you mentioned how illiberal moves were in the making and then somehow stopped and trying to undo things. And you especially mentioned legal moves. And I'm thinking of this division of society that also illiberal movements and leaders build upon, and how this is prevalent, if any at all, in Slovenia.
Oh yes, that's something I was thinking about for a long time. I remember, let's say 12 years ago, the height of the Polish success story, when most of Europe was also in a deep economic crisis, especially the southern part of Europe, and Poland was somehow still sticking its head out of the water, at least so it seemed. And I remember my friends also living in Krakow, visiting Poland, and also me talking and listening to you guys talk back then. It also seemed back then to me, this was around 2010, that a genuine debate over ideological boundaries was much more possible in Poland. And I've heard today and yesterday many times that there was a moment in which it seemed, or it was that you could actually have a political discussion with other-minded people, and that something has been lost. And today we discussed whether it's really just a nostalgic projection backwards, or was it really like this, or maybe it was some voices were always silenced and this came back, and so on and so forth. I have an impression, it's not just my impression, I think it's also a self-narrative of Slovenian society, that we have always been polarized. I mean, since the late 19th century, about liberals and clericals, this is something we inherited directly from Austria. Then during the interwar period against this division, but also division about how centralist and autonomous. So are we a nation, or are we part of the Yugoslav nation? That's a very deep polarization about the essential nature of the community. World War II, an experience of resistance, but also an experience of internal civil war, which lacks, let's say, from the Polish. I mean, it lacks actually in this form from the Polish experience. It's much more similar to some extent to the Greek one or in the Spanish one. So it's a very, very traumatic history of a small, tiny nation, but with deep divisions. And so I was thinking back, I don't think we ever had that moment of which, now we are having a nice dialogue. Yeah, sure. The moment of independence, it's precisely presented as a myth, because despite all these divisions, we managed to have a common political project. It lasted exactly, when the country was recognized, and this polarization came back again. And I was thinking that countries that have been living through this polarization and have a narrative about themselves of being polarized since ever, kind of respond to kind of this political tactics of increasing polarization in a different way. And I see this in Spain as well. Spain has this very traumatic experience of the Civil War. It's also a very polarized society. I don't think it's less polarized than Poland, but kind of it works differently. I think that there is like it's always there. It's always something that you would use in a political struggle, but there is also some, I would say, a reaction from the society, a more visceral reaction that because we know where this leads to. This like the ultimate horizon of this sort of polarization, civil war. And once you have experienced civil war, once you have our own historical narrative, this idea that we have experienced civil war, I think that kind of you react differently. That's always been my thesis, and I think that that's why maybe these societies, Greece, Spain, Slovenia, kind of. And I see that in Slovenia, always the party that would have an advantage. So it's always a double game. So of course, like you would try to increase polarization, but also showing that you're not doing that the other ones are polarizing, because you always have to play this double game. It always kind of there's a pushback. The one who manages to present oneself being the more reasonable one, the one who's also trying to depolarize. Is successful, and so even the illiberal right, which had this turn and of course copied from the Polish and Hungarian guidebook, didn't kind of realize this element. They realized it very late at the election campaign, and they tried to tone down their rhetorics, and of course it was even worse because like they came in sort of say rhetorical contradictions to themselves. And I think this has a lot to do. The other issue is like it's polarized unequally. I think that it's the economist. Is the economy stupid? If you remember this from the 90s. Like Slovenia was one country which didn't really have a neoliberal transformation in the 90s. This was possible because the economic system was more sustainable and more liberal already in the 80s. So the economic transition was smoother. Let's say the social pact between the state and the citizen, or like the ruling elite rather, and elites and the citizens wasn't damaged in such a way. This has its negative effects. That like the retainment, like the level of the old elite remaining in power on all levels of society was, I think, higher than in Poland. Therefore, like even that discourse against the remains of the previous regime was something that has been present in the political discussion ever since. But the fact that the social state since has always functioned in a way that it's better and more coherent than other Central European countries, I think played an important role. And it played a role that the liberal and the left liberal political part has also been using like equally nasty tricks in previously. So it was a very rough political climate. But in a way, it has created a certain sense of more balance. So there is the ability of push and pushbacks. Society has developed a sense of like a very rough sense of checks and balances. But of course, the question is like, is this sustainable for longer term? Because it still erodes the democratic culture. So.
Yeah, very short. I just wanted to say this: what you talk about, the heritage of civil wars and heritage of resistance, whether or not it was whatever it means to be successful. I just want to make a small comment there because I think for you to mobilize this heritage, you first have to own that history, which in these cases, like in the Hungarian case, definitely doesn't exist. And that is a template that the Polish government is importing, but let's point out that it's not just the US and Russia that Hungary imports from. This is from Austria.
Thank you very much for both for your points. Last question for Romania, because you're the one that mentioned how will it look in the future. So my question is, what is your intake on this? Do you see Romania moving closer to illiberalism, or somehow other forces could, come into play?
I don't think that I have a serious answer to such a question, because the epitome of the Romanian spirit would be unseriousness. And I'm thinking to a motto of Mateu Caragiale that at the beginning of the 20th century wrote a very nice novel, and he took a motto from the French president Raymond Poincaré. And the motto was the following: Nous sommes au port de l'Orient où tout est pris à la légère. Do you understand? We are placed at the gates of the Orient where everything is taken easy, or something like this. So, thinking about how the future will look like, for my PhD, I studied science fiction literature during the communist period. So somehow I'm used to analyze how people would relate to the future. But I'm very cautious to give answers to questions pertaining to how the future would look like. It's very risky. What I would like to stress is the way the Romanian political leaders are communicating. And I was struck today by a fact. I could not imagine this. I mean, yesterday a new Romanian government was sworn in. I do not know if you know this. Last year, before the Russian invasion in Ukraine, a new government coalition was formed, and the two main parties of the coalition, at that moment there were three parties, now there are only two left. The two big parties of the coalition decided to give the prime minister by turn. And yesterday it was the turn of the Social Democratic Party to give the prime minister. And of course, they made a new governing program, a long document I didn't manage to read, over 200 pages, but I've read a very good analysis written by a smart journalist, and I was struck by some kind of formulations there which epitomizes the double speech that the political leaders are using. And it's important to see how Romania will move to the future by having double speech used by the political leaders. And I'll give you the quote from the first pages of this political government program. And the sentence is like this. And you'll understand how the future will look like. I mean, this is a very serious statement about the future. So, we are fighting for the Romanians to stop being the modern slaves of Europe with the lowest wages in the European Union. So this is a future projection. I mean, if this fight will be won, we Romanians are not going to be the modern slaves of the European Union. So this is a future projection.
Thank you. I guess it goes well with the theme of your PhD.
Also from the country which kept chattel slavery the longest in Europe.
So I think we'll try, even if we're running a bit out of time, to take a few questions from the audience.
Maybe come up to the microphone. The microphone is on a cable. If you don't mind, come up here. So Who would you like to come first? Yep, please.
Right. Thank you a lot for your thoughts. During the whole discussion, I was thinking of Ivan Krastev, his very magnificent book, The Light Has Failed. And one argument really impressed me from this book. It was that the populations, after the transformation, they were kind of future shocked. Like the normal transition of generations of well, acknowledging some values, rebelling against others, was interrupted. And the next generation kind of did one thing which was not expected. They started to ignore the parents and the grandparents and have other values. And the argument from Krastev was like this, that the elder people, they were kind of expecting the governments to take over and educate the children for them and to carry out this valid transmissions to them. I think that's one of the big reasons why there's this huge electorate for the peace, for the Fidesz. It's mostly elder people. But at the same time, you could say, well, okay, then someday it might change because this generation will slowly move out. The thing is, right now, I think there's a new generation in the liberal international creeping up, which is kind of like more the alt-right, more like the Konfederacja in Poland, which is using smarter and more dangerous tactics. And what's your opinion on that? Like, do you see like a second wave of liberalism creeping up? Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe if there are more questions, we could gather some.
Yeah. So my question goes to Poland. I'm sorry for maybe asking like a bit naive question, but I would like you to elaborate on the way. So you said that public channels, they like highlight certain politicians, the party that is in power. I just realized that I don't really know like. According to the legislation, what are the relations between like the government and the media sphere? You know, in Poland, in terms of, for example, in Ukraine, we have like the only one public broadcasting that is like directly, well, not really directly, but still is funded by the government, which is Suspilne, which is just a public broadcaster, basically. And the rest of the channels, they are either, like ruled by politicians, or it can be, I don't know, an NGO or something. So I wanted you to, maybe to dive a bit into what this relationship should be like and what, they look like.
Anyone else?
I guess mine will be rather a follow-up on the first question about the second generation of Fidesz. I wanted to ask Hungary, because that's exactly the phrase in Hungary, that momentum is second Fidesz. You know, they use the same rhetoric in a way. And there's no, so to say, there's like imitation of resistance to the regime, but no content per se. So if you could comment if you think that momentum is a second Fidesz, and yeah.
Thank you. So it's a lot of questions and answers from your side. Do you want to start? No.
Thanks for the question. I understand the point that's being brought up. I think a sincere answer to whether momentum, this new political party, relatively new political party that emerged about 6 years ago or something like this, or 2017, 18, yes. Whether this is a new Fidesz, no. Whether it has the potential to be, yeah. And sort of the intonation is part of the answer and not just a joke, although I'm known for cheap jokes and I own them. But So the level of political opportunism in terms of conducting power does vary depending on what stage you are at. And it's not as easy to say whether somebody is in there with some true underlying values or just for the hell of it. By the looks of it, in terms of municipal politics at this point, we don't see momentum tending in this direction, or at least I don't see that. And I am not benevolent because these are exactly like 5 to 10 years younger than I am, so I'm predisposed to be angry with them at all times because we're Hungarians and we don't like younger people because they're going to live longer, unless we make sure they don't. So right now, from the performance of the past, say 6 years, it doesn't seem so. I do sincerely think that momentum doesn't offer or doesn't posit a proper alternative, both because it's incredibly urban and metropolitan in a country where the major division is between not even cities but Budapest and the unknown country surrounding it. And this is a legacy this is really like 150 years old heritage of imperial organization and a much bigger empire preparing its metropoli and then collapsing. Not that I feel sorry for that empire, but you know what I mean. So I wouldn't worry too much, but I'm always on the part of being way too demanding, not way, but more demanding with the up and coming, and much more direct with the up and coming political actors to make sure that they cannot deviate without any sort of obstacle. This is more or less what happened with Fidesz back then. So they won too much too early on, and it allowed for a level of centralization and basically just like central control of the political machinery, which a properly organized, like a movement where the participation and the advocacy power of the components is stronger, say Romanian public politics, for instance, which is way less centralized than the Hungarian, wouldn't be possible. But with this big leap from one moment to another, there's always an opportunity for the opportunist. I won't respond at length to the issue of to the Krastev question. He is the fairy godfather of Eurozine. So when I say he's on my mind all the time, I mean it, but in the best possible way. He's also a cherished author of ours. Did give us an interview on this particular book of his, which he wrote with Stephen Holmes, in a focal point that Luca curated with his forever buddy Ferenc Laco, specifically for the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. The title is The Legacy of Division. So if you ever have lots of time.
There's also a book.
Yeah, there's also an anthology. So if you ever have lots of time, because there's a lot of ideas there, check it out, Legacy of Division.
But you should read it.
Yes, you should read it. Yeah.
Like everything today.
Yeah, all the content is freely available, but if you also want it on paper, write to us and we're going to mail you one. We have loads of those. This is published by CEU Press, actually. So I think the important factor that I would emphasize out of their argument, and then Bartosz is going to, and I guess Luca are both going to, maybe Eugen too, will respond to this in more detail, is this resentment. And I think the main takeaway here is both that the illiberal movements, or like generally anti-democratic movements across the region and in Russia too, frankly, are exploiting this resentment. This resentment never had a proper response and still doesn't have a due and healthy response to it in most of the political cultures or the political palette, so to say. And I'd like to bring up something that one of my favorite authors, Slavoj Žižek, I just love his performative knack, emphasized during the Arab Spring. There's no left, right? There is administratively or like seemingly performatively a left wing, a political left, but leftist values, as in like functioning social structures, security, and living conditions for humans, they are not represented in all across the region. In most countries, very weak representation, very little. There is, beside the emerging sort of new far right generations, an emerging new, very small new generation of truly left-wing people. This is very little yet, and I honestly believe that until this this aspect is better represented, it generally in politics poses an alternative and tilts the whole sphere towards the livability of our societies. It's not going to change.
Okay, so I will make a short point of the second wave of illiberalism in terms of Confederacja in Poland. I'm afraid that it can turn to be a party that will show us the second generation of illiberal tradition, contemporary tradition in Polish political spectrum, although Confederacja opposes very strongly the, let's say, values and the agenda, maybe not values, as we agreed that there are no values in illiberalism, that law and justice represents. Well, their program is very brief. I would say no taxes, no divorces, and no state. But the future, yeah, even, yeah, yeah, Handmaid's Tale and Margaret Atwood's visions. But of course, the future is very uncertain. I will agree with Eugen here at this moment. When it comes to the situation, the legal situation of public media in Poland, it's quite complicated, but to put it very briefly, they are financed from the state budget, and actually the government pays for its coverage. This is the situation, and the party pays for its coverage. And there were two very interesting surveys published recently. One told that 70% of all ads in the Polish radio was bought by state-owned companies within last year or last 2 years. And another one regarding the presence of different political party members in the television and the radio. It should be equal, of course, so more or less 50-50 in terms of the mandates, seats in the parliament, and the votes that the parties got in the last elections. But in fact, it is, well, 2/3 to 1/3, of course, in favor of the ruling party. So rules and practice are very different and vary from each other. Yeah, at the highest point you can even imagine. And well, I would like to recall a short dialogue that my colleague heard just in 2015 when the new presidents came to the Polish radio, and one of the deputy editor-in-chief told that we won the elections, we got the mandate, we got well all the possible energy for being the winners, Now you, as the journalists, should develop the winning party's agenda and its narration. So this is your new mission. And my colleague, after having heard this, decided to leave the Polish radio. This is the end of the story.
Yeah, I want to chip in the discussion on the second generation. We have mentioned him today twice. Let's mention him again, the great doyen, the great merry godfather of Western illiberalism, the recently deceased Berlusconi. When 12 years ago, his wife publicly, when the sex scandals became too overbearing for her dignity, and she decided to publicly announce the divorce. She wrote a famous public letter, which was also not mentioned in the state television, in which she said a very interesting phrase. She said, "Okay, my husband is not a Napoleon. I'm not afraid of my husband establishing a regime or anything about that. But I'm really worried what kind of Italy will he leave behind? What kind of values will he leave behind? And I'm worried about what will come next." And indeed, the decade that followed his withdrawal from politics, which also came from the outside, he was basically deposed by his inability to manage finance, and maybe this is something you haven't mentioned in your perspectives of how the Hungarian regime might end, to make a parenthesis, this is a system that it's really based on the European Union. It's based financially, but also in a broader way, European Union provides security, provides the basic sort of stability for this system. It allows basically the continuous emigration of young people abroad so that they don't stay inside and cause trouble. So so it's really, really embedded in the European Union. And so, that is stable until it's not. So let's just leave it at that and go back to the main story. So, and what came next after Berlusconi indeed was not the restoration of the First Republic or a constitutional reform. It was constant degradation or continuation of illiberalism or populism with other means. And one of the phenomena was one of the movements that was actually propelled and started as a great anti-Berlusconi movement, the Five Stars, that became the next kid on the block. A very, very different type of populism, illiberal or not illiberal. That's it's a different question. It's different to categorize, but definitely a populist movement that had also transformed the political landscape. And then another form of far right, much more nasty, much more willing to use hatred against minorities, etc., much more anti-systemic. So things evolve and they never bounce back. But if you look, all of our democracies are very, very young democracies. If we take a broader, longer historical view, we look for example, the United States or France. Where was the United States 30 years after independence and introduction of democracy? This was the area of Andrew Jackson. Big crisis of American democracy. At the verge of he was also accused of being an autocrat, and he was. France, 30 years after the Third Republic, he was at the height of the Dreyfus affair. So, these deep crises are inherent in the development of democratic system. I'm not making a Whiggish history, it will go better. But if democracies are destabilized, if they become sort of a second nature of the political culture, then maybe they have to go through these deep crises. Maybe it's sort of, if not a necessity, it's still something that can be overcome. And then they become sort of the legacy of what has happened during this fight, the experiences that were accumulated in the next generation or down the road may be used as a sort of a precautionary tale, just to end on a more positive note.
Very, very brief. I would like to to end by mentioning Krastev is one of my favorite political scientists, and one of the things he discusses in most of his books are the topic of elections, the importance of elections in everything. And we should remember that next year there are in the world very important elections. We have elections in Russia, we have elections in Ukraine, we have elections in the United States, in Taiwan, and this is very important from that part of the world, the elections in Taiwan. We have elections in Romania, and I think in Great Britain as well, no? I think yes. But at the same time, we should take it easy about thinking on the election, because I do not know this from Krastev. I read it somewhere else. I don't remember where. The thing is that there are more chances to be killed by a car on the crosswalk than to change the outcome of the elections with your vote. So so in Russia as well, but they are not at war. And this is a joke that I know from Krastev. I mean, in Russia, there are two certain things for a person: the parents and the president. You are not choosing this.
And I think this will conclude our panel. Thank you very much, all the panelists, for your insights, and thank you to the audience for keeping with us. And